One that breaks down like the how-to, the nuts and bolts, and another that goes deeper into like, where does this fit in art history?
Yeah.
The big museum of everything. But I think the question we all have is it really art? Can an algorithm like feel and think and express the way that a human artist can?
Yeah.
Or is it more like, I don't know, super high-tech tracing paper?
See, even calling it tracing paper, I think, kind of misses some of what makes this technology so interesting. You know, one of the articles uses this phrase, music of digital origin, MODO for short. And I kind of love that because it feels, I don't know, almost more lyrical, right? Like there's an actual process of translation happening, which actually might be a good segue into the how. Like, how do you go from words on a keyboard to an actual piece of art?
Yeah, so break it down for us.
So it all starts with these algorithms, right? These really, really complex algorithms. And essentially what you're doing is feeding a computer program a massive, I mean, almost unimaginable data set of images. And it learns. It learns to recognize patterns, to recognize styles, even to recognize like emotions within those images.
Okay, so it's like art history on warp speed, basically. But then what? So it's got all this knowledge.
Yeah.
How does that turn into me making something?
Right, and that's where your imagination comes in. So you provide the AI with what's called a prompt, which is basically just a description, a feeling, anything that you can put into words. It could be something incredibly specific, like a portrait of a cat wearing a spacesuit, painted in the style of Frida Kahlo. Or it could be something very abstract, like the feeling of falling in love.
So it takes those words and just runs with it.
Precisely. So it takes that prompt, it analyzes it, and then uses everything that has learned from this massive image data set to generate something new, something that reflects the essence of your words.
See, this is what blows my mind about this whole thing.
Yeah.
Is the scale, you know? And one of the articles mentioned that this is actually technology that anyone can use. It's not like you need,
Exactly.
you know, some fancy studio.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the most exciting things about AI art is this idea of the democratization of creativity. You know, you don't need a studio full of expensive paints. You don't need years and years of training if you can imagine it. And you can type it. You can create it.
Yeah, no more excuses about not having the right tools or anything like that, right?
Exactly.
But I'm curious, do the articles give us any examples of what this looks like in action? Like, what's a really cool example of something this technology can do?
One of the things that jumped out to me was this idea that you could generate really detailed, really imaginative images of places, people, and things, is how the article put it. But based on prompts. So, for example, imagine typing in something like a crowded street market in a futuristic Tokyo lit by neon signs advertising flying ramen shops.
Hold on. Flying ramen shops. Sign me up. I'm there. But it is such a vivid image, though. And it makes me think this isn't just like static images, right? There's AI music. There's AI sculptures now.
Right.
It's like it's mirroring all the ways that humans create.
Absolutely. And that's something both of the articles touch on, is that this goes way beyond just like the digital canvas, right? You've got AI composing music, sculpting 3D models, generating poetry, screenplays.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. We went from digital paintbrushes to like AI orchestras in 5 minutes. This is amazing.
Yeah.
But is it art?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And both articles kind of wrestle with that a bit. Like, what is the thing that makes something art? Is it the process, the tools, the intent? Or is it about how it lands for someone, what it makes them feel?
You know, because at the end of the day, if I see a piece of art and it moves me, does it really matter if a human made it or not?
That's a really good point. And one of the articles even talks about how some AI art is already pushing those boundaries, right? It's not just about creating things that are like aesthetically pleasing. You've got conceptual art happening, things that are actually making us question like our relationship to technology, even our relationship to our own creativity.
So it's not just replicating what's come before, it's actually like forging new ground.
Absolutely. And I think that's kind of where that music of digital origin thing comes full circle, right? Because even though these programs are trained on all of this data, the actual output, the art that comes out, it's often really unexpected, even to the person who typed in the prompt, you know?
Speaking of how it works, I know one of the articles mentioned some of the actual techniques that are used, and one of them was GANs. I have no idea what that stands for, but it sounds,
It sounds very
intense.
It does sound intense. Yeah. So GAN stands for Generative Adversarial Network. It's a mouthful. But essentially, the way to think about it is you've got these two neural networks, and one is generating images, and the other is acting as like a critic, right? So it's constantly comparing the images that are being generated to the training data and saying like, okay, how can we make this more realistic? How can we make this more in line with the style that we're going for?
So it's like having this built-in superpowered art teacher.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great way to put it.
It's just constantly pushing the AI.
And the more sophisticated those techniques get, I think the more those lines start to blur a little bit, right? Between what we think of as like human creation and what we call artificial intelligence.
And yet, even with all of this advanced tech, there's still a human in the driver's seat, to a certain extent.
Totally.
Choosing the prompts.
Absolutely.
Curating the output. Really kind of directing the AI.
For sure. And if we even think back to, art history, this idea of technology influencing art, this is nothing new. One of the articles uses the example of Picasso's collages.
Oh, interesting.
And how those were actually influenced by the rise of photography, right? And mass production. Techniques that at the time were seen as very radical. But now we look back and we say, oh, that was so innovative, so groundbreaking.
Right. Every time there's a new tool or a new technology, it shakes things up a little bit.
Totally.
It changes the way we see the world.
For sure.
It changes the art that we create. And speaking of shaking things up, I feel like we can't talk about AI art without talking about NFTs.
Oh, we cannot. It's like they were made for each other. Right. So NFTs, for anyone who doesn't know, that stands for non-fungible token. And it's basically a way to track ownership and authenticity in the digital world, which historically was always a challenge with digital art.
Because before you could just right-click, save image as, and suddenly you've got a copy.
Exactly.
But with an NFT, you're getting the original.
You've got the real deal. And that's been huge for AI art because it's created a marketplace, right? It's created a way for artists to sell their work, for collectors to invest in it.
And it's not just like individual sales, right?
Yeah.
One of the articles mentioned like AI art collectives popping up, entire galleries in the metaverse.
It's wild, and it's changing not just how we buy and sell art, but how we experience it, Imagine like walking through a virtual museum, and instead of just looking at static images, you're interacting with these AI-generated sculptures that are responding to your presence. Or attending a live concert where the music is being composed in real time by AI.
Okay, that's the future I want to live in. That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
But I am curious, with all this talk of the metaverse and marketplaces, what does this mean for the humans behind the art? Like for artists, for the art world as a whole? I mean, it's a lot to take in. We've covered the tech, the art, even how we buy and sell it. But like, what does it all mean?
Right.
For someone listening who's an artist or just loves art in general, where do we even begin to process all of this?
Well, I think, especially for artists, it's really important to try to view AI not as like a threat, but as a tool. A really, really powerful tool.
Yeah, but a tool that can feel a little intimidating, right? Like
totally.
If an algorithm can generate 1,000 different versions of something in seconds, what does that even mean for my own artistic voice,
That's such a valid concern. But I always think back to like every new tool that has been introduced in art, whether it's photography, digital art software, there's always this moment of like anxiety, but also excitement, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately what matters is how artists choose to use those tools, how they adapt, how they innovate, how they push boundaries.
And maybe even like collaborate with the AI itself, because I know one of the articles mentioned artists using it as a starting point, like generate a bunch of images, a bunch of concepts, and then they take that and they build on it,
Absolutely. And I think especially for artists who maybe don't have those traditional skills, like they're not a painter, they're not a sculptor, it can be really empowering because it gives them the tools to bring those visions to life.
It all comes back to that democratization, right?
Exactly.
It's not just about who has access to the tech. It's about who has the opportunity to create.
Yes.
And to be seen as an artist.
100%.
And as all of this keeps evolving.
Yeah, where does it go from here? Right.
I mean, what kind of art are we going to be seeing in 5 years, 10 years? It's kind of mind-blowing.
And we might not even have the language for it yet.
That's a good point. And it makes me think back to something you said earlier about how this is all so new.
It's so new.
We're still figuring out the rules as we go.
Totally.
And I think that's an important thing for anyone listening to keep in mind. That this is not a done deal. This is an ongoing conversation.
Absolutely. It's constantly changing. And I think the important thing is just to stay curious, stay engaged, and maybe even a little bit brave.
Be brave, stay curious. I love that. So as AI art continues to blur those lines, challenging our definitions, pushing those boundaries, I think the big question we're left with is, what's next?
Yeah.
What new forms of creativity are going to come out of this? And how are they going to change the way we understand and experience art in the years to come?
It's an exciting time to be paying attention, that's for sure.
You said it. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder those questions. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of AI art, everyone. It's been quite a journey.